Neuroplasticity means if your brain changes because of toxic stress and the cortisol produced from it and anything else going on in the brain and the body, but typically the cortisol, it can change back. It can change back. And if you're dealing with this stuff, you can feel better. This episode, I'm going to make it brief, is about neuroplasticity. It's kind of a technical term, but it really matters. It matters to all of us, and it happens. Neuroplasticity means the brain changes. For the longest time in my life, until the last decade, I thought we were given all the brain cells or neurons in our brains by birth, and we got them and we never got any more. They really didn't change. Maybe they started to leave, reduced or something as I get older, but then I saw this TED Talk about neurogenesis, and it blew my mind, and it changed everything about how I understand the brain, but mostly about how I approach things clinically with all of my patients. And it's why this whole series on anxiety and depression exists on this channel, because from neurogenesis, I learned about neuroplasticity and how we treat the brain along with the person, the self, and the relationships when it comes to anxiety and depression. So neurogenesis means the birth of new neurons, and it happens in parts of the brain, namely the hippocampus, which I've talked about in this channel. When it comes to small hippo or smaller hippocampus or small hippocampus, it leaves a person feeling really blank, vapid and empty, just blunted emotions, just don't have much of an emotion. And that happens, again, from what the science tells us, because of toxic stress causing all the cortisol daily flooding the brain, and it just reduces the connections in the hippocampus, and it stops or inhibits neurogenesis, or the birth of new neurons in the hippocampus. What I've seen recently, or so far in the science anyways, there are like 700 new neurons born in the part of the hippocampus to populate or grow in the hippocampus every day of a human's life. Maybe that they've looked at science, they found a different number. The point is, though, now for a few decades we know that new neurons are born or created in the hippocampus every day. And cortisol not only reduces the connections and the number of actual brain cells or neurons in the hippocampus, but it also inhibits or stops or prevents neurogenesis. And that's why these emotional things happen, like don't feel anything, feel flat as a pancake, blunted, don't feel nothing. Hippocampus is also a really important part of the systems and process of learning and memory. So when you get to that point where your hippocampus has shrunken or atrophied, as they call it, it's hard to learn new things and it's hard to remember stuff. So it affects so many parts of our life if we have a small or smaller hippo. And we need to know that, identify that as clinicians like me, or your doctor, your whatever therapist like me, and then treat it. And I think I've said many times before in this channel, and I'll be talking about more soon, and that is in this series of episodes, is that serotonin medication, commonly it's like Prozac and Lexapro and Zoloft, they cause more growth of neurons in the hippocampus. They grow new neurons when you put serotonin in the system. And then when my patients see that, when they take that for a while, they see not only their amygdala shrink if it's big or bigger, but their hippocampus go back to normal size, because the serotonin, from what the science tells us, creates more neurogenesis in the hippocampus. These are really, really important concepts when it comes to what I call generalized anxiety, or the big Amy thing, or generalized depression, or the small hippo thing, is that we as therapists just can't say snap out of it. No one can, because you literally can't. If you have a big Amy or small hippo, you need to treat that from all different ways, like loving relationships and exercise and mindfulness and this and that and serotonin. And then you can do things to feel better. that whole snap out of it idea. You know, like people who really are experiencing generalized anxiety or depression, and people say, oh, just do this and you'll be fine. It's just, they know in their bones that's ridiculous. And we now have evidence in terms of neuroplasticity that just is not going to work. We have to treat the brain, and then the person feels better, and then they can make changes cognitively, behaviorally, and relationally. That's what I'm saying to you, is that if you're experiencing generalized anxiety or generalized depression, which in fact in the next episode I will really define better for you, then you want to think about talking to your doctor about serotonin medication. And again, I'm a therapist, and this is not therapy, this is information. So I'm going from not only all the science that I've read, all the journal articles and the science and the research about all this, but also what works in my practice. And people feel better in terms of getting rid of generalized anxiety or generalized depression if they take a serotonin medication for at least 2 months. Like the first month, I kind of feel better. Second month, I feel a lot better. Third month, I feel great. And then into the future, whatever you decide that to be with your doctor or your medical provider, because that's who you want to work with if you feel like these are your experiences and you want to treat them, because neuroplasticity is real. By the way, neuroplasticity also means, like, if you learn how to ride a bike, you know, you learned it forever, and there's a combination of how your brain and body works together, but it's like the wiring got solidified for how to balance on that bike along with your body, and that neuroplasticity of creating new connections. Like people say, if it wires together, no, if it fires together, it wires together. Meaning, like, if you learn something new and the neurons fire together and you're learning that, then they wire together, and then you've learned it forever, like bike riding, or at least a heck of a long time. So those are examples of neuroplasticity also. But in the emotional realm, what I'm talking about, it's about big AMI or generalized anxiety, or small hippo or generalized depression. That's neuroplasticity. Happens for a reason. Evolution shaped it that way. Like I always say, there's nothing wrong with you, believe it or not. There's actually nothing wrong with you, and we can treat it. Whether it's therapists like me, find one, get one if you have one, doctors, medication if you choose to or not. I recommend you talk to your doctor about medication for these two diagnoses. But neuroplasticity means if your brain changes because of toxic stress and the cortisol produced from it, and anything else going on in the brain and the body, but typically the cortisol, it can change back. It can change back. And if you're dealing with this stuff, you can feel better. But you need to work with a doctor and or a therapist to make that happen. I hope this has been helpful, because you deserve it and you are awesome.